Swadika, welcome everyone. Welcome to City Decoding and Transformation. You're here with me, Guitar Saruda Chusi, as your host. And it's with my great pleasure because I have a very special person waiting to share a great information with all of us here today. So I'm with Associate Professor Min Jae Kang, a Graduate Institute of Building and Planning at the National Taiwan University, or NTU. That's where he's teaching. And not only that, he's also currently the supervisor of ours, or the Organization of Urban Res. And not only that as well here, a lot of titles has been given out. He's also the director of Urban Settlements and Landscape Research Lab in NTU as well. So many of his professional, I think that would be very useful for our talk today. So first of all, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's quite a privilege to be sharing with you about my professional experiences in Taiwan.
Yes, we love to hear a lot from you there. So I've mentioned your professionals from the beginning, but then maybe you can tell us more in detail about your professionals in terms of urban development that you've done in Taiwan.
My name is Min Jae Kang, and I actually got my PhD at the University of Washington back in 1991, I guess. It's been a long time. And so I came back to Taiwan after that, and I started to get involved in a lot of community development projects. Actually, we call that community empowerment projects in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And it sort of grew into a series of activist movements because that was a time when the martial law of Taiwan was lifted. Right. And so the grassroots movement started to grow tremendously all over Taiwan, from rural side to urban side. And I think it was quite a shock for me after I came back from the US. And for instance, when I was teaching, and there was the very special moment that all students disappeared because they all participate in a street demonstration against a demolition of a settlement in the heart of Taipei City. And I think this is quite an illumination for me. And somehow I think I became very active in urban conservation. And part of that because I think we started to understand during this sort of global transformation of cities, we appreciate more and more about our local values, and also about this what we call public histories that somehow was neglected or overlooked in the process of official histories. What we mean by public history, well, I kind of borrowed this term from Doris Hayden in her very, very interesting book, The Power of Place. And she talked about public history in regards to a lot of disempowered communities, and about how those sort of negative memories of the city can be erased by the public sector. And so in those communities that I've been involved in, many of them are like illegal squatter villages, or somehow I think because of this sort of modernist urban renewal projects initiated by the government, and the citizens who refused to leave their hometowns started to develop certain kind of resistance. And it was also a time when housing price became totally unaffordable. And so there was one very special evening, more than 40,000 people slept on the streets directly to demonstrate against the government. And that was probably the most important civic movement after the martial law was lifted. And so I think it was very interesting at that time. And many of the projects that I might talk about later has something to do with this beginning of civil movement in Taiwan. Yeah.
Yes, I also heard that you have pictures that you could show us from time to time as well, so that our listeners can also see the pictures as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind that I
sure.
share with you some of the pictures here. Okay, this is back in 1989. That's the evening that I talked about. It looked quite shocking because at first glance, it looks like a scene of massacre or something. But that was more than 40,000 people slept on the streets. And so at that moment, we started to use this term called snail without a shell. It's really about housing. So after this movement, as you can see on the screen, there was a Graduate Institute of Building and Planning at NTU, but there's also the Organization of Urban RES. Everything starts with RE, like regeneration, revolution, renewal, what have you. So we actually talked about very sort of professional intervention in civil affairs. And there's also another very interesting NGO called Trey Mama Foundation for Housing and Community Services. So all these organization or institution, I think it's more than 25 years after that movement. And I mean, that's been quite a long time. And the impact of this snail without a shell is still very urgent in modern day Taiwan, because the housing price is still very high. But anyway, we talk about houses. Then how do you transform houses into home? But also houses is part of housing. And altogether, this collective houses or housing could be our homeland. And so we touched on the issues of the right to the city and right to housing. And this is still a very important issue in modern day Taiwan and Taipei. So I think after that, I've been involved in a lot of movement. For instance, this is also around 1997, and there was an anti-green bulldozer. It's kind of an interesting term because the citizen had to choose between a public park and an existing settlement, which was regarded as a squatter settlement. Because back in that time, a lot of political immigrants from mainland China after the war, they squat on public land. But for 50 years, they look at this settlement as their homeland. Of course, with strong identity and strong attachment. But because of this sort of development of urban park, most of the citizens, of course, favor a public park. But without relocation, the government tried to erase this homeland. And so the students of my institute and many of my staff members, they started to get involved in this anti-green bulldozer movement. And so this is really important in Taiwan, and that was the first time that what we call the democratization of Taiwan became the roots of civic movement. And you're looking at the picture of the transformation of this settlement into wide boulevard and public park. But without appropriate relocation, many people were left homeless. I think it was a forced eviction, which was kind of a pity that the citizens actually lost to the city government. But then after that, my involvement in urban conservation start with this very small project, what we call bo pi liao. It was interesting in translation because it means skin peeling alley, kind of scary. But because of this small community in the city district of Wanhua, they've been, existing there for 200 years. And all of a sudden, the city wanted to evict them and to expropriate the land for a shrinking school. So that was a very touching moment when all the residents, all the inhabitants get together to guard their homeland. And they refused to be relocated. But I think this is also part of the historical preservation of very ordinary citizens. Because before that, most of the historical preservation projects in Taiwan has something to do with very prominent or significant figures, like the president of Taiwan, or the emperor of Japanese period. But the grassroots citizens, their living experiences were hardly regarded as a part of the urban history. So that's the beginning of my involvement in conservation, not only about urban spaces, but also about urban memories and what we call the dynamic conservation, which involved living experiences of ordinary citizens. So you're looking at a tea house, one of the oldest tea house in Taiwan, also a single occupancy hotel that accommodated many poor or transient migrants in the city of Taipei. And later on, even though the physical structure of this very special urban settlement were preserved, but as you are looking at this picture, it was transformed into an empty scene for cinema making, which is kind of a pity for me, because after all the struggle and all the endeavor of urban conservation, the city gave you back an empty street, and all the people in this alley were evicted. So some people think this is a success story of urban conservation, but for me, this is a total failure. And
I see. So maybe before we go any further, just to go back, that you were involved in a lot of movement there in all the way back into that you have just started and give us all this information here. So I was just wondering from time to time here, all the interesting pictures that you have shown us here. So this kind of incidents or issues, they've been happening and going on a lot in Taiwan?
Yes. In this case, some people would think of Bo Pi Liao as a success story or a lucky case. At least this alley from Qing Dynasty is still preserved. But I think it's also a very special case that I use the term Sin City, because many people here, they're in the lowest tier of the city. Like, you might see tea houses managed by local women for 3 generations. Yes. Or some people think of this place as a collective of prostitutes or gangsters, they label this place as a sin city because with all the bad names, they could stigmatize this neighborhood easily and find the legitimacy to erase urban history of this alley. And so we have to kind of rebuild the history from ground zero to ask different households to tell their individual stories. And it was actually very touching to find out more and more untold stories of the historical Taipei, which were never revealed before. Yeah, and I think it is, for me, a very beautiful experiences to share all the stories with the community here.
For me, I have to say, frankly, as a foreigner and as a tourist that has been a visit to Taiwan before, I never knew that there were a lot of histories that going on because, you know, as for me, when I go, I see it as a tourist place. The buildings looks nice, the constructions, the landscapes looks nice, but there are history going on that you're telling us right now that been movement and then a lot of fight before outcomes like this and at the moment. So the problems that has been going on since in the history, since the beginning, 1989 that we started here until now. And nowadays, do you still have that kind of problems at the moment?
Yes, quite often that it happened in different cities in Taiwan, because historical preservation is considered very often as what the developers said, this could hinder or prevent urban development. If you think of history as like lifeblood of a city, and of course you appreciate more about the different stories involved in the urban fabric. But if you think of modernist development is a must or is the goal of urban development, and very often you're confront the situation between urban conservation and urban development or urban renewal. And so maybe I can tell you more cases or stories later in different areas of the city.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, maybe I can continue with another picture or another case here. And that was, Bopiliao was at the center of Taipei, and this is the city age. The city age, and so that was after the demolition of the urban settlement in the anti-green bulldozer movement. And so citizens started to organize an exposition, a fair of disempowered communities. And it happened in a place called Treasure Hill. And this is a settlement later rezoned as an urban park, because back then the city mayor of Taipei drove through this viaduct and looked at this settlement as an urban tumor. And he regarded this place as something illegal and informal that should be eradicated from the city surface. But of course, this place accommodated many generations of immigrants and different stories. So it happened after this number 14 and 15 park movement, which was the green anti-green bulldozer movement. And so many students started to get involved, including my students and my colleague. And we started our sort of urban conservation discourse because of the experiences in Bopiliao. We think not only the building should be preserved, but also the people who live here. I think in
yes.
Thailand, you must have seen quite a lot of informal settlements, like very beautiful water market by the river, and I think
Yes.
and if you're using modernist zoning code, some of them, of course, can be regarded as illegal because it's a pre-modern, but they exist long before sort of the urban development started. So I think here in Treasure Hill, people self-built their houses on the hillside by the river of Xindianxi. And so this is the general outlook of this settlement. It is very close to the city, actually, but because of the location is behind the city hill, so back then, not too many people noticed such settlement until the city built this viaduct, superhighway cutting across. So they think this is an ugly scene, but for me, I'm not sure this is ugly or it's actually pretty interesting for me, and I think it's aesthetically very attractive. And it is located right by a historical temple. So what we call Treasure Hill, it was named after this temple. And so originally it was meant to be demolished, but because what we call conservation, it was like a combination of conservation and action. We built a discourse for a progressive city and why the city government should preserve a squatter village like this. Because as I mentioned, the right to the city is very important, not only for the rich, but also for different communities of different classes. So it was a long process. It took about almost a decade to successfully. I'm kind of sensitive
from the beginning of the Treasure Hill, from the Treasure Hill movement. It took about a decade.
Yeah, to finally confirm the status of legal living in the settlement. So the city government later rezoned this area into a special zoning, what we call the conservation area zoning, and the original squatters are now allowed to live their original houses, the houses that they built from the very beginning, with a very special code that allow very sort of innovative sort of disaster planning, disaster prevention planning in a squatter village like this. And then we combined cultural planning to bringing different stakeholders into the conservation of this village. And because we need to convince or to persuade the urban planning committee that this place is worth preserving. So we started what we call global artivist participation projects. We invite quite a lot of artists come activist. What we call artivist is a combination of artist and activist. And they are very creative. They use their different sort of artistic creativity to participate in the preservation of Treasure Hill. And it's a long story because it took such a long time. But you're looking at pictures of the very beginning. Many cinema directors chose to make their films in Treasure Hill. So we started the very special organization of the inhabitants of Treasure Hill. It's called the Family Cinema Club. It's not like a social organization, but it's a cinema club. Like every Wednesday, they gather together to watch movies and to come together as a community. because in the sort of marginal, disempowered community like this, very often they are not organized. So when the bulldozer came, they didn't know how to fight. So there's certain kind of activists from outside, and they get involved, and also to help the community organize themselves, to empower themselves. So the very beginning, in the very beginning, the very first organization is a cinema club, which is very interesting. And on Thursday, they started to cook and to dine together. It's called shared kitchen and dining. And every dish is from a different household. And because of their original background is, all over China and all over different rural sides of Taiwan. So every dish, if you're looking at the recipe, represents a different sort of a cultural background. And so all together, this dining experience is it's almost like an exhibition of different cultures of Taiwan. And then, of course, there's certain kind of interesting artists from all over the world, from Finland. This is a project by an architect called Marco Casagrande. And it's a long story, but we help the community to clean themselves for the first time and to celebrate their status in the city. And it was a very beautiful project called the Attic. What we meant by the attic was like in a house, this is the place that memory gather together, but very often it is not zoned for any specific use. It is a collector of memories. So we started to light up this place at night. This is what we call a lighting the attic. Like in the daytime, it's kind of taken for granted, but at night when the light was lit up, it was a very special scene. And many people look at this place for the first time, like a dreamscape. It was kind of interesting. And then
yes, it looks very interesting here. And I was wondering from all this project and the pictures that you have shown us, how could you get the local communities, the local people to get involved and understand the importance of doing all of this?
Yes. Of course, because they knew very clearly about the threat of eviction, and from the government side, if they don't get involved and if they didn't get organized, they could be evicted. And because they didn't know art at all, but they thought it was really fun to celebrate the village with external artists, even though they had no clues or no idea what the artist was thinking about. But during the process of art making, it was actually a part of community building, and they celebrate this event by making dumplings, and they like this neighborhood chief at the corner of the slide. You see she lit up the first fire for this event, and afterwards I asked her how she felt, and she told me, I did not understand what this is all about, but this place has never been so beautiful. That's exactly what she told me. She didn't know how to express meaning, but she expressed her sentiment.
Yes, true.
Yeah, so it was a very special moment. So after that, the community participate in different artist projects. And they even now, some of them became artists. I'll show you. This is a picture made by one of the inhabitants of Treasure Hill, because she was not very happy being interpreted all the time by external artists. So she told me she wanted to interpret her homeland by herself. So the only skill that she knew was Photoshop. So she started to put together the picture that she collected from the past 50 years. So she put them together according to where these people live. So the picture that you're looking at, all the faces, they are sort of distributed according to where their home was back then. So it was.
You mean the position of each of the families or people that I'm looking at right now?
Yeah, almost like this person who was shown here. He might live in the middle part of this village. And so it's like a geographic picture of this community, but it's also like a combination of different faces and households. For me, this was a very beautiful experience for me to be included in this picture.
Yes.
Anyway, so this is one of the projects initiated by local citizens, and then they started to organize themselves as a cultural village association, and they built their oven. They built their little shop, a grocery store, and they could now sell their dishes, and every dish has carried the story of a household. So they become a different character in this community, and so I mean, originally it was a spontaneous community, but now.
So you mean what I'm looking at right now is an outcome of after you have going on from the Treasure Hill movement, and then the people has been involved and educated until they are well organized?
Yes. So you're looking at what we call the Treasure Hill hive. I'm not sure this is a good translation, treasure hive, because they think this is their nest, this is their home, this is their homeland.
Right.
And they named Treasure Hive because this is their story house. This is a reused building because some of the people actually moved away after the conservation projects. Mm-hmm. Actually, they moved away long before the project started because they are not sure if they were not sure if they could actually stay during the threat from the government bulldozer. But anyway,
so they move away at that time, and then they came back.
Some of them came back, but some of them never came back. So some of the empty units became artist village after that. Okay. So if you're visiting Taipei, you could Google International Artist Village. You might stay here at Treasure Hill because some of the units are now transformed into a hostel that could accommodate external visitors.
Oh, it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so you could live with the original squatter and they came back to stay at their original homeland. So anyway, again, you might consider this as a success story, but for me, this is an ongoing struggle because as you can see, many inhabitants, original squatters, they did not know art at all. And so after the transformation of a squatter village into an artist village, visitor from all over the world, they, you know the book called Tourist Gaze by Zhang Wuri, because according to the book, you might know that the gaze of tourists could be a threat for the community. It's not very comfortable to very often looked at, you know, like they are living in a zoo or something. But originally they just, you know, live here as an ordinary citizen. But now they have to kind of adapt. So some of them became organizer or activist, or even artist. And every year they celebrate what they call a light festival in Treasure Hill. And they will build their own lanterns and interesting objects. So this is kind of interesting in a certain way. But I mean, the ongoing struggle is still hard to overlook. But anyway, so after that, there's another village, not very far, another squatter or informal settlement. It's called Toad Hill. And again, it's a place where many film directors chose to make films here. And this is, at the very beginning, we thought it's not easy to conserve another squatter village. So I asked some of the artists and some of my students to participate in sort of survey this village and to draw them and to at least preserve the village if, on paper, if unluckily, if they might be destroyed or demolished in the future. But we started, again, very simply by building spatial narrative for different households to ask them about their domestic experiences and their settlement experiences. And very often, you will be touched by how they sort of negotiate with each other to build a settlement like this. And some citizens might consider a settlement like this do not have like public spaces, not like public plaza or public park. But if you're looking at this village from a different perspective, because this whole village is almost like a commons, like an urban commons.
Yes.
It's not like a designated public space. If you're looking at modernist zoning, every inch of the land is demarcated by planner as a public or private, and the segregation between private and public is very clear. But here, the staircases that they negotiate and they build together as a public access is shared by all the inhabitants or households of this village. And it was a very interesting public access. And also in this village, this is later we consider is an ecological corridor of southern Taipei. And they live here with different species, animals, insects, birds, and it's a very rich ecological community. So the first time I heard about this community was from a renter in this village. He showed me a documentary and asked me if I could bring some of my students to help the local community. And it was a very simple documentary. And if you have the opportunity to look at the film, it's basically about some senior citizens, sitting together, sharing different dialogues, daily dialogues without anything significant, very mundane and very casual, but very touching.
So what did you find? What did you, after you saw the documentary, what came to you then after that?
Because some of the senior citizens moved away, but they came back every day to talk, to chat with their own neighbors. They had to come back because it was almost like a mandatory desire that they had to come back to visit their neighbors, the old neighbors, even though they were relocated in some places nice. And some of the informal settlement inhabitants were not allowed to stay here or didn't have the option to be relocated. So it was a very complicated situation. And the government wanted to demolish the military dependent village first, and then later to the informal squatter village. So we started again this sort of conservation interventions. And from this film, we get to know quite a lot of interesting households. This is an area where Taiwan shared certain sort of military defense through Sino-US defense. And so many US military sort of experiences in these villages. Some of the local household, they used to be the cook or driver, chauffeur in Taipei Air Station, which is like a military base for the 7th Fleet of the US Army. And anyway, so this is interesting in a way that the informal city actually support the formal city, formal city. And I think the history of Taipei cannot sustain itself without the stories of this community. And anyway, we started again different simple events like cinema, what we call magic carpet cinema, you know, to share red carpet with the community, to screen the film that was made in this community, and to clean up some of the sort of ruins, and to bring in different artist activity, and to help the households to repair their furnitures. And of course, the most important is to bring them out from their domestic environment to share experiences with each other and to organize themselves. And then we, of course, to highlight the importance of this public memory and to build a discourse of public preservation. And we bring this case to different sort of architecture biennale, and to draw the attention from international community. And finally, the city government declare and even to register this settlement as a cultural landscape heritage. And again, it looked like a success story because not only the village is preserved, but also the people who live here is still living here. But the daily struggle never stopped. They have to organize themselves as an intentional community, and then to build themselves as a eco-village, and that's their mission for the future. So anyway, I just maybe if you still have time later, I might show you the mechanism about the negotiation process between the government and activists or academia or professionals and local communities. And I think this is a very interesting sort of mechanism in Taiwan.
Yes, we love to share that, but we're actually running out of time. We have about 5 minutes left right now, but it's very interesting from all the cases that you have mentioned and gave us all this going through all these pictures together, so we can clearly see what had happened in Taiwan. And I think it happens all over the world as well. And even though in Thailand as well, we're also struggling in some of the areas. In particularly, it might not be as 100% the same, but almost, you know, that had happened into Thailand as well, I think. So maybe just a few questions before we go towards the end. What do you think that, you know, the key success, you know, of, I know that you said that it's not totally, it seems like it is success, but still some struggling or some obstacle points in the future to make it sustain. But well, I do think that it is partially success. So maybe you can share the key message or the key success that we can look up or see as model in the future.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little reluctant to use the word success or successful.
Yeah.
I think this is all the time ongoing struggles. I still have to get involved in those communities, even though some of them had been more than a decade. Like Treasure Hill, it's been 12 years now. And
yes.
I think this is interesting in a way that in the democratic society of Taiwan, and very often you will see the academician, I mean, someone like me, even though I'm teaching in the university, but very often I will bring my students to do field works, to get involved in activist movement. And they all love to participate in community affairs. And somehow, during the transformation of Taiwan's democratization, I think some of the scholars might become governmental officials. And so we are able to, negotiate, or if I borrow some terms, like smuggle, like we could do certain negotiation under table with certain officials in the government side. So there is an interface there that between the government and between the grassroots community. And I think this is very important. Without those negotiations, the government and the grassroots community might become really confrontational at a certain point. I'm not sure if negotiation is a good thing, because somehow you compromise, somehow you could only go so far as the government has to follow urban sort of a code and regulations. And so I'm using this sort of slide to maybe show you a basic structure for the city of Taipei, or even in Taiwan. There is a top-down process from the governmental side. You see the municipal government, and very often in Taiwan, we have this Department of Social Affairs responsible for delivery of social services and social welfare. And then there is another Department of Civil Affairs for public services. And then there is a very important character called neighborhood chief, or in Chinese, we call it Lija. And so there's like two different sides of community. One is this neighborhood chief from Civil Affairs Department. And the other one is Community Development Association that is related to Department of Social Affairs. But another interesting aspect is the Department of Urban Development or Department of Cultural Affairs. They will initiate certain community empowerment projects. That's where a lot of external activists, professionals can get involved to collaborate or cooperate with local community to help them, or to organize a certain sort of event with the local community to empower local communities. And then it was very difficult to go into details, but let me skip this one. I'm going to use this sort of diagram to further elaborate this sort of negotiation boundary between top-down and bottom-up.
Okay, sure.
And you're looking at here this sort of a very interesting term called intentionalist. Okay, because sometimes I use this term intentional community to describe intentional individuals or groups, such as ours, who don't live together, but share certain common intentions. But then there's another intentional community that live together, like co-housing or eco-villages. Okay, so like in the case of Treasure Hill or Toe Hill, intentionalists such as me get involved in this sort of informal or unorganized urban settlement. We bring in external intentions or values, and that could have certain impact or influences on the individuals of informal settlement. And some people think this is a very top-down or like a power structure. We represent a certain, creative capital or cultural capital, imposing our ideas on individuals in the informal settlement. But without those ideas, very likely this informal settlement didn't know how to organize themselves to fight against or resist against the government. And they didn't know how to negotiate with the government. They didn't even have certain representatives to sort of discuss with their future with the government side. So very likely they could become the victim of certain urban renewal or urban development projects, top-down projects, I mean. So I think as the intentionalist or academician or activist, what have you, we will bring certain kind of urban values to share with the community. For instance, eco-village is one of the external value and concept that we brought into Toe Hill, but they found this idea is very similar to their daily experiences. It is not totally unfamiliar for them. So they started to think maybe we could transform ourselves into a co-housing or eco-village community instead of just an informal settlement. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I truly understand what you're saying right now. So I believe we're actually running out of time.
Yes,
I have to say that as well. Well, but since that right now here, after all the case, can I call it case studies from each of movements or projects that you have been showing us today here, we've seen a lot of things going on, and mainly, as you said yourself, that you wouldn't call it a success, even though I myself see it as a success, but still some struggling. And maybe I think it's about how to make it sustainable in the future. Yes. And so it is a thing or a problem or obstacles to most of the projects that we're dealing right now in every country about the work, how to make it sustainable. Well, but we're very happy to have you with us here today. And I love to continue talking to you. Hopefully we have your great support and we can have a wonderful talk like this, maybe for the next time, or it would be great if we could see you in person.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe in the near future. Yes. So it would be great if we could see you in person and share all this fruitful information together once again. I know, well, we still have a very limited of time right now, but still today we saw a lot of pictures and heard a lot of information, been sharing a lot. I think that would also do Thailand a great opportunity for us to look back to what we have been doing in our country and take some of your project as a role model that we could, somehow adapt and make that happen in Thailand as well. But still, we are still struggling and ongoing about the term sustainable, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, but thank you very much for your time, for being with us here. It was very enjoyable 45 minutes together. And also thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching City Decoding and Transformation. Stay tuned with us. We'll have a lot of great information coming on. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you.